Good afternoon, good evening to all of you joining us tonight, this afternoon, wherever you are. Sunday of Parshas Kiseitse. Let's start with some questions which come through the past week. So the first question here is, can I use a brick? This is from a Chabad house opening straight onto the street. And the question is about using a brick as a doorstop. So there's two issues here. One is about muksa and one is about carrying. So as far as carrying is concerned, we're not allowed to carry dalad amas, 4 amas, about 6 feet in the street. So to move the brick in one go, to move the brick more than 6 feet would not be allowed, but within 6 feet, within dalad amas, that would be okay. Question is, as far as muksa is concerned, are those bricks muksa? And does it help if they were designated for this purpose before Shabbos? Sorry. So let's take a look in the Shulchan Aruch. We're looking at Siman Shin Ches Seif Nun Gimel. So we have here a halacha. A log of wood, piece of wood, like from a tree, a coarse log, or to take a stone, a rock. You're not allowed to take a rock to cover as a lid for a barrel, or to block a door, or to use them to strike a bung. Now, the word berez in contemporary Hebrew is referring to a tap, faucet in American, where you can turn a handle to open and release liquid. My understanding of berez in their language, it refers to a bung, and to get it in place, you'd want to strike it with pressure. So you wouldn't be allowed to handle a rock in order to strike this bung into place. And the chiddush here is, even if you've used this rock several times, many times in the weekday, and even if you've had in mind to do so before Shabbos, so you've got this rock and you've used it several times in the weekday for striking or for blocking, whatever it may be. That's not enough to demuxify it. Unless you've designated that rock indefinitely for that purpose. And only then, only then will the rock become a utensil as such, by being designated for this perpetual. That which has been designated just for the one Shabbos, that does not afford them the status of Keli, unless you've done something to modify it, which will indicate that they are going to be designated for this purpose, and then you're allowed to move them, then you're allowed to move them for that purpose, but not for another purpose. So let's come back. We've got these bricks. These bricks are just plain bricks. They have not been modified. And I would suspect that if there would be some building project in the future where they need a couple of bricks, so those bricks would be used for the building project. They're not miyuchet for door stoppers. So according to what we've just read, those bricks should be muksa. Yeah, that seems to be. But bear with us in another minute. Let's finish off the scene. But when do we say that merely using a rock for not indefinite designation is not good enough? That's talking to use it, bekisui pichovis, to use it as a lid, as giras hadelas, and to block a door. To strike a bank. She'ain, the such things, she'ain darkom, shall eitz ve'even liyachid oistum lakach, where it's not normal to designate a rock or a log for this purpose. Aval, the very same rock, the very same log. If you designated this rock or this log for a use which is normal to do so, the same rock he had in mind before Shabbos lived to use it to crack nuts, not about fine. Even if it was only going to be used as a nut cracker just for this Shabbos, then you are allowed to move it and not only just for this purpose, for other things too. Since it is suitable for this purpose, and important point, it's normal to do so. It's normal to use a rock to crack a nut. Okay, that's in their lifestyle. The designation does not need to be an indefinite designation. Even a minor designation is also enough. Even if the intention is just for the one Shabbos. Or even though he didn't have in mind for this Shabbos. So coming back. So now, coming back to our question. We have here a question of using a brick as a doorstop. Is that a normal use or is it a totally unconventional use? I believe it's a very normal use to use a brick, an odd brick, as a doorstop. And therefore, in the sif which we just saw, it says to use a brick as a stone, as a cover, as a lid for a barrel. That not, because that's normal. That's not normal. And it's only going to be on muksa if it's designated for this indefinitely. But if it's talking about a usage which is normal, then even just designating for the one Shabbos is enough, and it's not muksa. So therefore, the answer is that those bricks having been used or designated for the one Shabbos is enough to make them not muksa. So I was asking about you can't crack nuts with this stuff. So Minhag Chabad is, the Alter Rebbe was concerned. He obviously noticed that sometimes when people were cracking nuts, they sometimes came to do boiler, which means if you're using a hammer and you're cracking nuts, sometimes from the pieces of shell, let's say you've got a pile of nuts, and here you've got a pile of shelled nuts. And here you're cracking on the other side of the table, you're cracking them with a hammer. And then a little piece of shell would jump up and fly and settle into the cracked, ready to eat nuts. And you normally will be tempted. You'll pick out the shell from amongst the nuts, from edible nuts. You shouldn't, So that would be an act of boiler. So because of this, obviously the Alter Rebbe saw this as a problem, and therefore the Alter Rebbe advises not to crack nuts altogether. So in Chabad we don't crack nuts altogether, although nowadays we use deserts proper nut crackers. So this business of bits and pieces flying all over is obviously much less, but that's a minhag Chabad not to crack nuts on Shabbos. In Hadin, Alter made a takana for his following. In Hadin, you are allowed to crack nuts on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Right. Let's move on. That answers the question. Let's move on. Right. So now you're going to see a beautiful picture. Where's it? Maybe mouse. Okay. Oh, you see this? It says, my impression is that this picture is somewhere in Tel Aviv or in Netanya, because it's overlooking the sea. That's why I suspect it's somewhere, perhaps in Netanya. Go upon him. It's somewhere in the picture. Look top left. You can see there's a word in Hebrew. That's why I'm guessing it's in Israel. So anyway, the question was about using this beautiful veranda to use it as a sukkah. So the top, as you can see, is with slats. So they are spaced enough apart, so that you should be able to put schach over it, and you've got to create a sukkah. That's not a problem. The question is about walls. What you can see in the picture is there's the one wall, which is the patio doors. Whichever way you're going to roll them, one way or the other, it's going to be a wall of 7 tefachim, which is the minimum. Now, the main question is on the right, as you're looking to the picture, which is closer to the sea. But before that, let's look at the left. As you can see on the left of this picture, there's a wall, and then the wall is, let's say, about 10 tefachim high. On top of that, there's a glass barrier. You can see the same on the far right. You've got a wall and then a glass barrier. So my impression is that even the wall before the glass barrier is already 10 tefachim, and then it goes. There's a gap till the ceiling. So what we have in Hilchos Sukkah, we have a usage of a rule called gud asik, that if you have a wall which is 10 tefachim high, then you could imagine as if it's extended upwards until it reaches the level of the schach. Now, had this pergola, whatever it's called, not been open all the way, and it been like you'd have to use the principle of doifun akuma, then you'd have a problem to allow the imagination to work twice. To imagine that wall is coming all the way to the top, and then to say the wall is bent over, to be able to use doifun akuma and gud asik in one wall, that's problematic. But as it is, where the wall is right at the edge, this wall is right at the edge of the sukkah within 3 tefachim. Therefore, this is a low wall on my left as I'm looking. Back. This wall on my left, as I'm looking towards the picture, is a valid wall for the sukkah, even though it doesn't reach till the top. Okay. Before we get to someone's asking something. Let's keep to all right. Now let's focus on the right side as what we're looking, the side closer to the sea. So there, it's all open. So the fellow who asked me the question asked, first of all, if there were a glass wall, would a glass wall count as a wall for a sukkah? And my answer was emphatically yes. A glass wall is a wall. Actually, a lovewood wall made with 3 wires is even more transparent than glass, and it's kosher. So the fact that it's transparent does not impede its kashrus. And when we say there has to be an X amount of shade, that's talking from the top. And the fact there's lots of daylight coming from the side is irrelevant. Okay. But now the main thing is that there's no glass there either. Everyone knows that you can have a sukkah made with 2 walls and 1 tefach. And there is a beautiful piece in the Kutei Torah talking about Smoiloi tachas leroshi v'yeminoi techabkeni, that his left hand is under my head, and that's referring to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It's a time of smoil, a time of strictness, if that's the right word. And then the Ymin here embraces me with his right arm, and that refers to Sukkot. So there's Kivyochel Sukkot is the time where the Sukkah is all around you. It's Hashem embracing us in the Sukkah. When you embrace someone, so you've got your upper arm and your lower arm, and then you've got your hand. So as if to say, you've got one eye, you've got 2 walls and a little bit. So it's well known that the third wall of the sukkah can be even a tefach. However, it's not so poshut that. So if you had not learned the halacha properly, you get the impression that you put 1 tefach right at the edge, and you're good. So that's your tefach. Now that is not the correct halacha, and we're going to read this inside from the Shulchan Aruch Siman Tov Reish Lamed Aleph. If the walls of the sukkah, if their 2 are connecting like an L shape, So then, you can make another wall, a third wall, which is a width of a tefach. Now, just to clarify, before anything further, the third wall, min ha'toyre, or halacha Sinai, would have been kosher just one little tefach. One tefach at the edge would have been good enough. Midrabonon, we're going to make a wall, a panel of a tefach, and we're going to somehow develop it into 7 tefachim. Again, we're going to have here a panel of a tefach, and that tefach is going to be, you'll see how it's going to be expanded as if it's 7 tefachim. How so? You take an oif, which is just over a tefach, and you place it within 3 tefachim from this wall, from one of the walls. So now we have a concept of lovud. A gap of up to 3 tefachim is as if it's closed. So we've got a panel of just over a tefach, a gap of just under 3 tefachim. So together that makes it 4 tefachim. So instead of putting this panel of 1 tefach just near the wall, we move it a little bit away, 2.5 tefachim, let's say, and then that gap will be counted as filled in, and we've got 4 tefachim. We're not finished yet. Then on the other side, we've got this panel just under 3 tefachim from the wall, and on the other side we're going to put another post, and we're going to connect the panel to this post with a lintel. In this way, there's going to be a doorway. So a doorway also counts as a wall. So on one side we're going to have a tefach and a lovud, and on the other side, we're going to have a tzuras hapesach. And in that way, the tzuras hapesach at least around 4 tefachim. In that way, we've got 4 and 1, and 4 and 1 and under 3. So that's going to be approximately the shear of 7 tefachim. It's all right. The details are a little bit more complicated, but that's what he's saying here. But again, let's read it inside. Then you place another pole at the other end of the wall. And you'll create this as a doorway. Now, what is now going to go into a little bit of detail? As you know, when you make a tzuras hapesach for Erev, it's imperative that the horizontal sits on top of the verticals. So somehow, to put this panel, you'd have to somehow, it wouldn't be able to, in this post, as you can see in the picture, it wouldn't be able to be knocked onto the side of the post. You'd have to add another little piece of wood, a vertical, of 10 tefachim high, let's say on the inside here, and you'd connect the panel, or the top of the panel, to the top of this extra piece of wood, and that way you created a tzuras hapesach, and that's how you'd be able to have your third wall, as if it were a full wall. One other point is that the chona shal gabein does not need to touch the verticals. Let's address that. Let's try to be as practical as possible. Let's say you manage to get a piece of furniture which is 10 tefachim high, and you place it over here within 3 tefachim of the existing wall. Or it can be there, or it can be over here on the either edge. Okay. You place a piece of furniture which is 10 tefachim high, a unit which is 90 centimeters high for safety, and you place it over here within 3 tefachim. Then you want to now make a tzuras hapesach. So you could put a piece of wood, as I said, a vertical piece of wood on the inside of this post. On the corner, this corner post, you have a stick which is 10 tefachim high. Then you could put a horizontal from the post till the wall. It does not need to touch the vertical post which you've added. It can be higher up, so long as it's directly above the 2 posts. So again, you have a post down here 10 tefachim high. Then you can have your horizontal added somewhere across here. It could be even, but you might be able to count the existing piece of frame If it's directly above it, that should be like your lintel. So that's the way you could make the sukkah. Again, one tefach plus a lavud plus a tursa pesach. So I wanted to clarify that, not to rely on, oh, just one tefach is enough. It's one tefach which is developed into 7 tefachim. Right. Coming back, you asked about the stone. Could you crack, so what we saw in the previous question, if you designated a stone as a nutcracker, and you designate indefinitely, then you'd be allowed to crack nuts with a stone. All right, not terribly practical. Let's move on to, someone asked me this question about the bracha on soaked oats. So we generally talk about either baked foods or cooked foods. Here we're talking about soaked. So that's not so explicit in Shulchan Aruch or the Alter Rebbe Seder Birchas Hanenin. That's why I'm going to read from a contemporary sefer called Sharei HaBracha. And so he writes, in his text, he had written about soaked oats or soaked grain. Masha kosavdu, she'im nishru dinom kemuvashol. That oats which have been soaked have the same status as if they were cooked. In many areas of halacha, something which has been soaked overnight has got the same thing as it was cooked together. So let's say if you had soaked potatoes in milk, so then those potatoes become milchig. Just a little bit, if they fell into the milk and you took them out and washed them, they wouldn't become milchig. But if they were soaked there for a while, so then the soaking makes them absorb, similar to the way cooking makes them absorb. So therefore, he's saying the soaked oats is as if they had been cooked. When you've got these oats soaked overnight, it's not just a nibble like you have like a nash or something. It's how do you say, should we say, an authentic way of eating. You've prepared the food in an authentic way, and therefore the broch is buried in the. Then he brings another sefer who says even if it's less than 24 hours, fine. The word is it should we say a relatively menschliche form of eating rather than just snacking? You could nibble on a couple of grains, but that's not a way you'd have for breakfast. Whereas if it's soaked, it becomes quite edible apparently, and therefore the brocha becomes mezainis. Let's move on. Okay, so now someone asked me, and I felt it was worth discussing. We're coming up to Tishri, and we're going to have 3 Shabbosos, which overlap with Yom Tov. So the first day of Rosh Hashanah, first day of Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeres are all on Shabbos. Okay, that's beautiful. And whenever this happened, the Rebbe was really, I learned on Shabbos, I was reading a letter of the Rebbe, Michtav Klali. The Rebbe talked about this being a Shabbos-dik a year, and how to take the message from how the year starts with Shabbos. The moment we're going to focus on the halacha. What is going to happen? What would happen if as you're davening on the Yom Tov Dika davening, you're using your machzer and you forgot to say b'yom haShabbos hazeh? But at the end, you said mekadesh haShabbos v'Yisrael v'Hazman. So, are you Yotze or not? Now, so we all know that, let's say, if it's on Rosh Chodesh and you forgot to say Yalav Yovei Shachas or Mincha, you have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. So if on Shabbos you daven the Yom Tov davening, you didn't mention Shabbos at all, obviously you have to daven again. So here the question is, what about if you mentioned it only in the ending? But in the middle of the bracha, you didn't mention Shabbos at all. This is really what we're going to learn carefully. Let's see. Right. let me just throw at you a question. Why is it that the first, if you forget the Yalav Yovoi at Ma'ariv of Rosh Chodesh, you don't have to repeat the Shemona Esrei? And the reason for that is because in the times of Chachomim, of times of Sanhedrin, at Ma'ariv, it wasn't confirmed it's going to be Rosh Chodesh, because the next morning they'd be waiting in the Beis Din would be waiting for the witnesses, and if the witnesses didn't come, so it would not be Rosh Chodesh. So for that reason, unlike the night's Ma'ariv of Chalamoyed, where if you forget Yalav Yov, you do have to repeat. But yeah, if you forget Yalav Yov, the night of Rosh Chodesh, you don't have to repeat. Now I ask the question, the night of Rosh Hashanah, also, they didn't know whether the witnesses would come the following day. So if you forget to say, okay, Hamelach HaKodesh, or forget, or whatever, or if you forget the Yalav Yov in benching, you shouldn't have to repeat the benching, etc. And the halacha is just the opposite. Listen to this. The Alter Rebbe says in Siddur that if you forget Yalav Yovoi at night of Rosh Hashanah, you do have to repeat benching. If you forget Yalav Yovoi by day on Rosh Hashanah, you don't have to repeat benching. And I'll explain that. If you forget Yalav Yovoi by day, since there is permission to fast, I know it's not a popular meaning, but there is are those who are noyeg to fast on Rosh Hashanah, and they have permission to do so. The whole Siman Shulchan Aruch. So to fast on the day of Rosh Hashanah is permitted. Since it's permitted to fast, you can't be obliged to repeat the benching if you forgot it. It's not a chiyuv to have that meal. Actually, in the original Alter Rebbe Siddur, there's no nusach of kiddush for Yom Tov, for the day of Rosh Hashanah. Sorry, for kiddush for Yom Tov there is Eilamuyah day, but the nusach which we have for Rosh Hashanah, etc. So that the whole kiddush is not there in the Siddur Torah. Okay. Mash'enke, the night of Rosh Hashanah. So then it has a whole thing in the Gemara. In the Gemara Erekin, it talks about a person wants to have a siman toiv, we should eat this food and that food, and there's all this simonim which we have the night of Rosh Hashanah. So the night of Rosh Hashanah, there's a chiv to have a meal. And therefore, if you forget Yalav Yov, that benching, you have to repeat the benching. By the day, it's not a chiv to have a meal, and therefore, if you forgot Yalav Yov, you don't have to repeat the benching. So I'm asking here the question, why is the night of Rosh Hashanah different to the night of Rosh Chodesh? That's my question. And the teretz is the following, that the way it's described, and there's a beautiful siman, Tov Reish, in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, it's a very long seif, and describing the whole development of when the witness is coming late, etc. And it says the following, what would happen in the times of Chazal when they were waiting for the witnesses? So it would be the night of Rosh Hashanah. Today, this morning was the 29th of Elul. Tonight is the eve going into the 30th of Elul, possibly to become Aleph Tishri. So we would go to shul and we'd daven Ma'ariv, and all relying the likelihood of the witnesses coming tomorrow, and the best will pronounce today, tonight and today and tomorrow as Rosh Hashanah. What would happen if it comes till midday and no witnesses have come? So at a certain stage, they made a takana that we're not going to accept their witnesses after Chatzos. But still, the first day will remain Yom Tov until nightfall, mid Rabbanon. And it will be Lamed Elul, and it would be Yom Tov. And then the following day would automatically be Aleph Tishri. So and that would be the Rosh Hashanah Day Rise. So again, if the witnesses did not come by midday, so then the first day of Rosh Hashanah would be Rosh Hashanah until nightfall, Mid Rabbanon. The second day would be Yom Tov Rosh Hashanah min HaTorah. This is the whole thing. You've heard this expression of Kedusha Achas and Yom Ha'arichto. That's the background to this. That the first day of Rosh Hashanah is going to be Rosh Hashanah either way, either midrabbanan or mid'oraisa. Consequently, it's not like the night of Rosh Chodesh, because the night of Rosh Chodesh, if witnesses don't come tomorrow, it's going to be garnished, because it's just lamed of the day of that past month. As good. The lamed elu, even if it doesn't become Aleph Tishri, it still remains Rosh Hashanah midrabbanan. And as a result, if you forgot to say Melech HaKodesh, and if you forgot Ya'aleh V'Yoveh at the benching, at the meal by night, you do have to repeat the bench. Okay, so that was a little bit on a tangent, but let's come back. So now here we have the question of what happens if you forgot to mention Shabbos in your Yom Tov Dikadav. Just take a look at the chat. Right, so let's read this carefully. So this is one where from Simon Tov Pezai. Let's read this carefully. If one did not say after v'chartonu, and you started Ya'aleh V'Yoveh. In Ya'aleh V'Yoveh, you added Shabbos. If you did say Ya'aleh V'Yoveh, if in the middle of the bracha you incorporated mention of Shabbos and in Ya'aleh V'Yoveh, but if you didn't mention Shabbos in the Chasimo, in the Baruch Atah Hashem, you just said Mekadesh Yisrael V'Azmanim, so then you have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. So it's imperative so far to mention Shabbos both in the main body of the bracha and in the ending, Baruch Atah Hashem, ending of the bracha. V'yesh chol klum zeh. Others disagree, and they say if you did not mention both Shabbos and Yom Tov at the ending, you're yotzeh, because you mentioned it in the main body of the bracha. Again, so far we see here like this. If you mentioned the Shabbos in the main body of the bracha, and you didn't mention Shabbos in the ending, two opinions. But what happens if you mentioned it, if you didn't mention it in the main body, only in the ending? That's not so clear. That Alter Rebbe doesn't address that. But now let's take a look in the Mishnah Brura, in the same place, in Simon Tov Pesach. Let's read this carefully. That if in Ya'aleh V'Yoveh you did not mention Shabbos, you wouldn't be yotzeh, even if you mentioned in V'Hasienu, which is the last paragraph. And you said Shabbos Komer de Kochecha. So he says that's not good enough. He brings such a svar. But that's that if the, so again, you got three main areas. You've got Vatit and Lonu, then you have Ya'aleh V'Yoveh, and then you have V'Hasienu. Mishnah Brura is mulling over whether mention in V'Hasienu is good enough. But therefore, it follows, therefore, if it's mentioned just at the end, that's not good enough. And this is where you see a quote from a contemporary sefer called Isha Yisrael. If you didn't mention Shabbos in the bracha, even though you finished off Mekadesh HaShabbos V'Yisrael V'Azmanim, you're not yotzeh. So let's just summarize very clearly. If you did not mention Shabbos in the main body of the bracha, even though you mentioned Shabbos at the end of the bracha, you would not be yotzeh. If you mentioned Shabbos in the main body and you forgot it at the end, then you would be able to be yotzeh, according to the Alter Rebbe's bringing the Tutztad. Right. Let's move on. Now, there is obviously a bunch of just mentioned there's a difference between the way 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and 2 days of Rosh Chodesh. The way we work is the second day of Rosh Hashanah. So second of Rosh Chodesh is Aleph. The second day of Rosh Hashanah is Beis. That's true because generally the witnesses would come on time, and Lamed Elul would become Aleph Tishri. All right, let's not get into sidetrack. That's another complicated discussion. Okay, so now someone asks me this past week a cholent which has in it chunks of meat and chunks of potato, and the chunks are so large that if you lift with a regular spoon, you'll have either potato or meat, but not both. So what is the bracha on cholent? Now, cholent is if they put in barley in cholent, it makes it complicated. Cholent is a food to be eaten at the Shabbos table where you've washed. You shouldn't have these shilas. But people ask the question because they want to be Mekayim, Toyamel, Chaim Zochu, I don't know, or they want to have the Indian. It says in the Zohar, Shabbos, my name is Borch and Kula Yoima. So the rest of the week they are enjoying the leftovers from Shabbos. Fine. Anyway, here's the question: is what's the bracha on a cholent, which has got large chunks, and large chunks of potato, large chunks of meat? Is it one bracha or two brachas? So again, I'm using this contemporary sefer, Sharei HaBracha, and he writes the following: Taroives shel dvorim gedolim nechsheves ketaroives. The mixture of even larger pieces would still be considered a mixture, which therefore the majority would prevail. Im oile bekaf be'eso achilo mishni haminim yachad. It's only when do we call it a mixture that the one component will dominate the other. That's only when you lift a spoon of the stuff, you're going to have both components in that spoonful. In fact, you can recognize them from one another. That doesn't matter because there's a mixture. Right. And therefore we have it goes into details about salads, etc. Now, this idea of whether in every spoonful you're going to have both components, it's not mentioned anywhere in Shulchan Aruch. The Alter Rebbe doesn't mention it. And you could also start arguing what's the size of a spoon. But it is written he quotes here in the notes, he quotes from the Aruch HaShulchan, who's a contemporary of the Tzemach Tzedek a little bit later. He met the Tzemach Tzedek, that if you don't, in one spoonful, you won't have both components, that's not called a mixture. He brings also from Shlomo Zalman something to that effect. So this is a kind of a guidance from contemporary poskim. When is it called a mixture that the majority or the main component will dominate? When usually in every spoonful you'll have both elements. But if it's such large pieces that it's either one or the other, then they are not considered a mixture, and you'd have to make a separate bracha on the meat and a separate bracha on the potatoes. Let's move on to the next question. Next question is, where is my cursor? Okay. So the same fellow asked me, I know it's not your sheet, but he asked me what's the din of lokshin in chicken soup. This is already more mefurish in the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, in Perik Zayin, if I'm not mistaken, where he talks about the mixture, and he says that if it's a stew, this is if they are cooked together, but if they were not cooked together, they were just mixed later on, then he says, if you want to have both, the intention is for both, then you would not follow the majority. Rather, you make a bracha on each of the two. First on the food and then on the soup. And even if the added ingredient, like the lokshin in this case, is grain, and so normally we say in a combination, grain would be the dominant feature. But that's only if it were also a food, if both were a food. He says, interesting logic here. If grain was made into a drink, it would also become shahakal. So at any rate, the bottom line is that if you take chicken soup and you take separately lox or mandalach and you put them into the soup, so they don't become one food, and you make a separate bracha on the mandalach first and a separate bracha on the soup, shahakal second. Right, it's straightforward. Let's move on. So here we have a question. One of our listeners, he listens to the recordings. He met me at the Oyel, and he says, okay, I want to ask you a question. How does he work as far as carrying? As you can see here, as he steps up to the main entrance, and the steps down to the basement, and he wants to be able to, this is particularly relevant on sukkahs, because for them to go to their sukkah, they have to go through the main stairs, down through the basement, and that's how they'll get to the sukkah. So they want to be able to carry in this area in front of the stairs. So what would be necessary in order to make it permissible to carry? So just to perhaps emphasize that the halacha, as far as Reshus HaYochid is concerned, is not about ownership, but about structure. So we have no doubt that this area, which has got this light green line there, the light blue line, that area is definitely is the property of the Chabad house. There's no question of ownership, but it's totally open to the street. There's no wall setting it apart. There's nothing to separate it from the street. It's what we call Loshen Porutz B'Milui. It's totally exposed to the street. And therefore that does become a problem to carry there. And we're going to learn inside from Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch Siman Shin Samach Gimel what would be necessary in order to be able to carry there. So Sim Sham Shin Samach Gimel Sif Beis Lo Yitir Begimel Mechitzes Velechi Echod Ekoiro Rechov HaTefach El B'Movui Aval Chotzer Shehi Perutza B'Milua B'Ruach Revius. You have a chotzer and it's totally opened on the fourth side of the street. Eino Niteres Elo V'Pas Rochav Dalet Tfochim. You have to have a panel of 4 tfochim wide. Sheyamidenu B'Tzad Echod B'Mokim HaPorutz. So let's come back to the picture. If you'd have a panel of 4 tfochim wide, somehow minimizing this gap. So that's one option. Sorry. Oi. Im yitz letakno b'shnei tzidei hapirzo dai b'shnei pasim sherechov on tefach. Sorry, mashu shirak sheyiyah gavoya gavom yutfach. You could make this permissible to carry by putting up 2 panels. Each one is a mashu. If you take even a 1 by 1, even less than that, and you'd attach it here along to this. Is that a gate? Either there or somewhere around here, you'd have a vertical thing of 10 tfochim high, and the same thing you'd have is here something which is 10 tfochim. Assuming that this is less than 3 tfochim, can't measure that, but you have to have a post of 10 tfochim from the floor up here. So then, by having a post on either side, somehow reducing the gap, those 2 posts would allow you to be allowed to carry on this landing between the upper staircase going up and the staircase going down. So that's what you need to have is 2 verticals, 1 on either side of 10 tfochim, and that would be enough to allow you to carry in that space. Now we have one last thing. Someone was asking me about, it's not on your list, but someone was asking me this past week, they're writing an article, something about Shabbos meal, and we're talking about is the fish, chicken soup, and the chicken menu, the 3 courses, is that part and parcel of the Tzuras Shabbos? Okay, that's the traditional Tzuras Shabbos. Then I mentioned also about a white tablecloth. So the person wrote back and that they asked, is a white tablecloth is that important for Shabbos? Or the person writes that some people put down a golden tablecloth. No, is that a hidur, etc. So what I saw here, I looked around. There's a very good sefer on Minhagim of Shabbos. It's a 2-volume set. HaShabbos B'Kabbalah U'V'Chasidus, written by Rabbi Yosef Karasik. And there he gave a reference to Siddur HaArizal. So what you have here is from the Siddur HaArizal. This is from the Reb Shabsi Mirashkov's edition. And he talks about preparing the table. And we've discussed this once about the table should be of 4 legs. There's a preference to have a 4-legged table compared to the table in the Mishkan. And putting salt at the table, the somim. Now, the Sfardim have this minhag of having hadassim and saying a bracha on the Boirei Aseh B'Somim or something at the Shabbos table. Ashkenazim, I guess, we're lucky to have a hadassim for Sukkot, so it's not it's standard minhag by us. But then he says here, Yifrois Alov Mapo Leveno. He means in Levona. Levena is a brick. Mapo Levona, one should spread on the table a white tablecloth, or the lechem v'emtza shulchan, and also there should be bread at the table, and v'ala lechem mapa shniya, and on the bread should be another cloth that should be that the bread, the chalas, should be enclosed, base mapos, enclosed between 2 cloths, reminiscent of the mon, which was enclosed, in between 2 layers of dew. So that's why we have a preference to have a white tablecloth. I know most people are not particular having a white cloth to cover the chalas. I don't know what the Rebbe did at home, but the Rebbe's Farbrengens, they would be covered with a white cloth, but I don't know whether that's what they do. But but I call upon him that the white tablecloth, this is general minhag Yisrael. It's important, of course, if people are asking, to understand the hierarchy of halacha. It's not the same as making kiddush or having candles for Shabbos. It's on the level of a minhag toiv, etc. But yes, that is the traditional minhag, is to have a white tablecloth for Shabbos. In the Piskei Shuvas, he mentions this also v'nagim b'mapa levona. He gives a reference to 2 sources, one to Droshes Ibn Shu'ib, which I did not manage to find. It's a sefer which was printed 400 years ago, a bit difficult for me to read and to do a search there. Then he gives a reference to Chuas Maharshag, which unfortunately I didn't get around to looking up, so we'll leave it there. Rabbi Lou is commenting, not tablecloth, but candlestick. We got from a company, so this is going back probably about 45 years ago, by Mivtza Neshek, and the organizers for Mivtza Neshek managed to obtain from a company a small black candlestick. And the Rebbe commented that it's not appropriate to have for Shabbos a black candlestick, any other color, but not black. Thank you, Rabbi Lou, and I wish you all a good evening, and we should meet in good health. And Kaminhik, wish you all a ksiva v'chasima toiva l'shana toiva masuk.